Arya glanced down from the cracked skylight onto the glimmering expanse of the city. Twilight had just begun draining color from the rooftops, turning the glass on tall buildings into a muted, ghostly mosaic. She fiddled with her camera, adjusting the lens to better capture the hush of evening. It was her favorite time to take photos, just before the neon signs lit up and the corporate towers beamed with artificial brilliance. The city always seemed suspended between two worlds at twilight, not quite day, not quite night. This was the hour of shifting shadows. Perhaps it wasn't entirely surprising that something otherworldly would choose such a transitional moment to arrive. As she hunched over, ready to snap a shot, a flicker of something small and brightly colored zipped across her peripheral vision. At first, she thought it was a stray bird or a piece of refuse caught in the wind, but it moved with too much purpose, too much whimsy, to be debris. She peered into the gloom in time to see it again, tiny, winged, and glowing faintly in the half-light. It disappeared behind a large ventilation shaft on the roof of the old newspaper building across the street. Just as Arya lifted her camera to catch another glimpse, the city's overhead streetlights buzzed, flared, and then dimmed out. A city-wide hush fell. The digital billboard on the adjacent building sputtered. The tall communications tower at the center of the skyline flickered. Arya's phone vibrated in her pocket, the screen glitching with random patterns. Confused, she looked down to see a text message from her friend Sam, but it contained only a string of erratic symbols and half-formed letters. Her heart skipped a beat. She leaned over the rooftop's edge, curiosity spurring her. She noticed the crowd below, shifting and murmuring in confusion. Many passers-by held their phones up, tapping screens that wouldn't respond. Others stood under streetlights that blinked like strobe lights in a poorly designed club. Yet, the city had not fallen into total darkness. From the corner of her eye, Arya once again glimpsed a flutter of luminescence weaving between the buildings. She realized with a jolt that there were more than one or two. There were dozens, no, perhaps hundreds of these tiny winged creatures dancing from rooftop to rooftop. Some soared in pairs, leaving faintly luminescent trails behind them, while others buzzed about in clusters like playful sparkling bees. As they moved, the technology around them fluctuated. Billboards blinked, security cameras swiveled aimlessly, and people's phones crackled with static. Arya snapped a few hurried photos, though she couldn't be certain she was capturing anything more than smears of moving light. She was overwhelmed. While she had always been open to the idea of magic or supernatural phenomena, seeing it so vividly before her eyes, tiny radiant pixies, was a jarring revelation. She suddenly sensed that this was no mere spectacle. It was an invasion of some kind. A swarm of pixies had taken over the rooftops, hijacking the city's technology through sheer magical interference. Her heart raced, propelled by some half-formed instinct that she should intervene somehow, or at least find a better vantage point. She climbed down the fire escape of her own building and sprinted across the street, camera bouncing against her chest. At the base of the old newspaper building, she found a rusted ladder leading up toward the roof. She scaled it swiftly, ignoring the clanking of metal and the chill that whipped across her face. Once she reached the top, she pulled herself onto the coarse gravel surface and saw them, an entire throng of dancing pixies swirling around the old, defunct satellite dish perched at the building's apex. Some archaic piece of technology from the paper's heyday, the satellite dish had long ceased transmission, but now it served as a luminous playground for the little creatures. They circled it, tapping tiny hands and pointed feet against the metal. Their wings were brilliant, fringed with hues of aqua, silver, and a pulsing gold. Each time they made contact, a vibration erupted, shimmering into the atmosphere. Arya felt it in her teeth, as though someone ran a tuning fork across her jaw. Along the edges of the dish, small illusions flickered, street maps from another era, drifting advertisements for products that didn't exist, and faces of people she did not recognize. Closer to the swarm, she could hear a faint, chiming laughter. It was as if they were having the time of their lives. playing pranks on the unsuspecting city. Some of the pixies continued to flit between the dish and the ledges of neighboring buildings, weaving illusions into the signals of the modern satellites perched on skyscrapers. The illusions layered themselves into everything from Wi-Fi connections to digital road signs. That explained the confusion below, the strange texts, the malfunctioning lights. An entire city's worth of digital infrastructure was now a canvas for these mischievous creatures. Arya realized this wasn't random. The city's constant broadcasting and rampant digital signals must have acted as a beacon, attracting the swarm. Perhaps it was like a forest of invisible frequencies for them to play in. She clenched her jaw, feeling an inexplicable urge to protect her home from further chaos. Even though she was merely a freelance photographer and not exactly well-versed in magical pest control, she couldn't just do nothing. A sudden crash from behind startled her. She whirled around to see Sam hoisting himself onto the rooftop. He wore a baseball cap backward and carried an old laptop under his arm. He was breathing heavily, as though he'd been running for blocks, which, of course, he had. "Arya," he panted, "I've been trying to reach you on your phone. It's gone insane, giving me nonsense messages." She looked at him, still trembling from the adrenaline rush. "Me too," she said, raising her phone's cracked screen. "I'm sorry I vanished. You wouldn't believe what's happening." Sam glanced around, eyes widening at the cascading lights of the pixie swarm. "I got a bit of a clue on my way over here. I saw a couple of these little buggers messing with an ATM, making it spit out receipts with weird illusions all over them." He took a step closer to the spinning disco of lights around the old satellite dish, his expression hovering between fear and wonder. "Yeah," Arya nodded grimly. "They're messing with all the city's signals, weaving illusions into them, phones, billboards, everything. People are going to freak out. Half the city is already on edge, thinking it's some kind of elaborate hack or a major glitch in the system." Sam frowned. "We need to stop this. But how?" He opened his laptop and powered it on, even as it flickered uncertainly in the presence of the pixies. "I can try something. Maybe create an interference wave that'll break their illusions. But I'm not 100% sure how to keep it from also knocking out the city's entire grid." "Let's think. These creatures must have a threshold for magic. They're feeding off frequencies or they're mixing their illusions into them somehow." She gazed at a group of pixies perched upon the satellite dish. They wore expressions that, if Arya didn't know better, looked almost like smug mischief. "If we could overload them or redirect them, maybe get them away from the rooftops, back to wherever they came from?" Sam shrugged. Sounds easier said than done, but maybe we can coax them away with a higher concentration of frequencies somewhere else." He looked at Arya. "Like a Pied Piper approach? We create a stronger, more enticing beacon for them?" She nodded, mind racing. "Right, but where?" Her eyes darted across the city's skyline. "The highest concentration of signals is probably at the main broadcasting tower in the downtown district, right?" Sam followed her gaze. "Exactly. If we forcefully redirect all signals to the top of that tower, it might lure them away from the smaller rooftop dishes. Then we can isolate them there." Arya took a moment, imagining the chaos if it went wrong. How do we keep them from wrecking the entire tower's broadcast? That's going to cause a citywide meltdown. Sam nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need a fail-safe. Once they concentrate around that tower, we scramble the signals in a quick blast. Hopefully that scrambles them, to disorients them enough that they abandon the city." Arya wasn't entirely convinced. She looked over at the swirling pixies, still chattering in an otherworldly harmony, twirling little illusions around them like ribbons. Some illusions showed entire fantasy cities suspended in the sky. Others depicted streams of coded text laced with vines and flowers. The combination of technology and natural magic was both breathtaking and terrifying. "We have to try," she said at last, swallowing her trepidation. "Let's go," Sam replied. Descending the ladders and fire escapes was a surreal experience, with the city's malfunctioning streetlights blinking in an endless loop of flicker and darkness. At one intersection, they witnessed cars honking at each other in confusion, traffic signals all stuck on red. Digital billboards displayed nonsense, dancing silhouettes that made passers-by question their eyesight. But what alarmed Arya most were the illusions that had begun weaving into people's phones, causing them to see messages from loved ones that weren't real or calls to action that made no sense. Panic was spreading. She could see it in people's faces. They ducked into a quiet, narrow street. Sam hunched over his laptop, fingers tapping frenetically. Thin lines of code scrolled across the screen, occasionally warping from the Pixie interference. "I'm routing as many signals as I can toward that broadcasting tower," he explained, "but it's going to be tricky. I need to physically plug into a main junction box to increase the power. There should be one just around the corner." He pointed toward an unassuming door set into a concrete wall. Inside the small room, they found the city's network junction, a jumble of cables, blinking server units and cooling fans. Sam plugged in through a service port, eyes drilling into the lines of code. Nearby, Arya stood watch, hearing the hum of the electronics providing a semblance of normalcy in a world turned chaotic. Every few seconds, she could see a passing Pixie outside the small translucent window lighting the alleyway. Their high-pitched giggles and luminous trails drifted in and out. Finally, Sam exhaled. "Okay, I think I've got it." He closed his laptop, then pressed a few final commands on a console. The hum of the servers amplified, and the lights flickered overhead. "I've just rerouted all local signals to the main tower. Over the next few minutes, everything in the city, phones, Wi-Fi, broadcasts, transmissions, will route up there." "Will people still have service?" Arya asked, worried about the unintended consequences. "Barely, but enough to keep essential communications going, I think. It might just be shaky while we do this." He wiped sweat from his brow. "Now we wait and watch to see if the Pixies take the bait." They stepped out of the humid room into the alleyway. The sky above was turning deeper blue, with the full moon haloed by a faint swirl of pink illusion. The Pixie soared near Arya, hovered in front of her face for a fraction of a second, and then darted away. The creature left behind a fleeting illusion of shimmering flower petals. Arya's heart clenched unexpectedly, a wave of wonder overshadowing fear. She remembered that these Pixies, chaotic as they were, seemed to be less malevolent and more playful in nature. They were like children poking at buttons they didn't fully understand, delighted to see what would happen. That thought eased her anxiety. She just hoped the plan wouldn't harm them. They dashed through side streets and made their way to a vantage point a few blocks from the broadcasting tower. Though it was seldom used for local TV anymore, more a relic overshadowed by multiple smaller digital stations, it still soared proudly above the skyline. Even from this distance, Arya and Sam could see the swirling lights of the Pixies beginning to converge. The illusions that had spread scattershot across the city were now drifting in that direction as well, forming a shimmering funnel of brilliance that danced along the skyline. As they got closer, Arya could feel the crackling tension in the air. A number of citizens had also gathered at various vantage points to stare at the spectacle of twinkling lights streaming toward the tower. Sirens echoed in the distance, and news drones buzzed overhead, their cameras capturing the phenomenon which itself was partially compromised by illusions that turned some news feeds into a kaleidoscope of false images. They found a service ladder that led to an observation deck partway up the tower. The climb was lengthy, the metal rungs cold against their palms. Finally, they stood on a narrow walkway where the wind whipped their hair into tangle. Far above, the shimmering swirl of Pixies now encased the top of the structure like a bizarre carnival. Arya spotted illusions, ephemeral lines of code dancing with illusions of woodland glens. Leaves and flowers flickered into existence, then vanished into sleek neon lines. Tiny orbs of swirling color popped and reformed in midair. Sam opened his laptop again, hooking into a tower service port just below a blinking control panel. "I'm going to initiate the scramble," he said, voice wobbling with nerves. "Hopefully this confuses them enough that they give up, but we need to be ready to bail out of here if it doesn't work." Arya nodded tightly, bracing herself against the tower's railing. The metal vibrated beneath her palms as the Pixie's magic intensified overhead. She watched them, transfixed by a swirl of shimmering wings. They were so numerous now that they looked like a single glowing surface that pulsed with life. She heard that distant, tinkling laughter again. For a brief moment, she felt a pang like she was watching children at play, oblivious to the harm they were causing. Sam's hands danced over the keyboard. Almost there. Then he pressed the enter key. A sudden pulse of light exploded from the tower's spire, rippling outward in concentric circles. The wind whipped into a frenzy, and Arya felt her hair stand on end as that wave of disruption tore through the illusions. The illusions around them flickered chaotically. Images of forests, coded text, and dancing figures fractured into scattered sparks. The Pixies whirled in erratic spirals, as though disoriented. Their laughter turned to a confused buzzing. The entire swarm shimmered and lost cohesion, many fluttering away from the tower in scattered arcs. "It's working," Sam began, but his words were cut short by a sudden, loud whine emanating from the control panel. The tower's metal structure groaned. Something was feeding back into the system. Arya felt an electric charge course along the walkway, forcing her to leap back. "Sam?" she cried out, worry seizing her. The scramble wave had caused some unscripted effect, maybe an overload. One by one, the pink illusions overhead shifted hue to an alarming blue-white glare, like lightning about to strike. The swarm's prismatic dance was turning volatile. Caught in the swirl, the Pixies circled the spire with frantic speed, generating a storm of flickering illusions. It was as if they were trying to resist the scramble wave. Sparks rained down on Arya and Sam. She shielded her head, but she also noticed that the swirl began to drift upward, away from the tower. A torrent of energy left the spire in a giant swirl, and the Pixies followed, drawn like leaves swept up by a whirlwind. Instead of descending into the city, they were spiraling above it. If Arya had to guess, they were heading into the night sky beyond. Gazing up, she saw the Pixies forming a single bright band that arced across the horizon, disappearing into the distance. As the last glimmers vanished into the starry darkness, a hush descended over the city. For a moment, it was as though the wind itself stopped breathing. Then came the return of normal sounds, traffic, distant sirens, and the hum of electricity. Streetlights blinked back into consistent illumination. Billboards resumed their usual rotation of advertisements. Phones chimed with missed messages. Arya exhaled in relief, though her knees felt like jelly. She turned to Sam, who stood there with his laptop under one arm, mouth slightly agape. "We did it," she said, voice trembling. "They're gone." Sam took several deep breaths, then nodded. "I think so. I'm worried about the system feedback, but it looks like we didn't blow the tower into smithereens." He pressed a few quick commands on the control panel, confirming the city's network was still functioning. "Everything's coming back online. We might have some residual glitches for a bit, but nothing catastrophic." Lowering her gaze to the streets below, Arya saw that some onlookers still pointed cameras or phones skyward, observing the last faint flickers of the Pixies in the distance. A wave of relief washed over her, mixed with a bittersweet sense of loss at their sudden departure. Even though the Pixies had nearly driven the city to chaos, they'd also brought a strange, elating magic that reminded her of a long-forgotten sense of wonder. She felt oddly grateful for that flash of impossible dreams. The next hours passed in a haze of exhaustion and sporadic relief. Teetering on the line between curiosity and caution, the city's inhabitants emerged from apartments, bars, and offices to compare stories. Internet forums exploded with wild theories. Some insisted it was a foreign hack. Others believed it was an elaborate marketing stunt. Then there were those who simply posted shaky videos that captured the glimmer of wings and illusions, labeling it a mass hallucination. Arya and Sam knew better, of course, but telling the full truth would likely invite skepticism, or even panic. Early the next morning, they sat together in a cramped diner that still had a flickering "open" sign above the door. Sam sipped on a black coffee while Aria picked absently at a plate of half-eaten toast. Sleep had been impossible for them. They were still coming to grips with what they had seen and what they had done. "It's not every day you redirect a swarm of magical pixies away from your city," Sam remarked, swirling his coffee. He stretched his back, a flicker of residual tension dancing in his eyes. "You all right?" Aria shrugged, glancing outside the diner window. "Yep. Just processing." "Those illusions. Some of them were beautiful. Part of me feels like we squashed something precious, even if we had to protect everyone from confusion." Sam pursed his lips. "Agreed. They seemed curious, not evil. I just hope we didn't cause them any harm by pushing them away." Slumping back in her seat, Aria recalled the swirl overhead that had shot skyward, reminiscent of a meteor shower in reverse. She lingered on the memory of that one pixie that hovered in front of her, leaving behind shimmering flower petals. She wondered if, in some other world, those creatures lived lives free from the tangles of technology. Perhaps they had just stumbled upon the neon swirl of the city and treated it like a grand carnival ride. "You know," Sam said quietly, setting his mug down, "this probably won't be the last time something like this happens, especially if the pixies spread the word about the trove of signals here. Maybe we need a better system to handle it if it does." Aria nodded, mind drifting. "Maybe I can transform my photography business into something else. Document supernatural events, or at least prepare us for it." They shared a wary smile. The city felt different now, like a veil had been lifted. Right outside the diner window, morning commuters hustled by, glancing occasionally at their phones, as if testing whether everything was really back to normal. The skyline beyond was quiet and still, sunlight glinting off the angled glass. But that hush no longer felt merely like a city between shifts of day and night. It felt like a lull between waves of something far grander. Over the next few days, Aria found herself watching the sky whenever she had a spare moment. The glitchy illusions had subsided, and digital signals ran smoothly again, but she kept wondering if the pixies would return. She felt an odd pang of nostalgia for them, and the city's hum of technology, usually comforting, now seemed hollow, as though missing an unexpected sparkle. She spent hours scrolling through the photos she took on that rooftop. Many frames were blurred, but a few captured faint glimpses of winged shapes or swirling patterns of light. Though subtle, those images hinted at the impossible truth she'd witnessed. Reporters continued to swarm the city's center, quoting experts who insisted it was an unprecedented software meltdown, or a freak atmospheric event that disrupted signals. A minority highlighted the eyewitness accounts of strange lights or illusions. The city gradually settled back into routine, though it felt quietly changed. Sometimes, Aria stepped onto her own rooftop at twilight, scanning the horizon. The buildings still offered their neon glow, and the city still vibrated with digital pulses. But no tiny wings flickered in the corners of her vision. No illusions danced across the rooftops. It was a cool morning when Sam popped by her apartment unannounced, laptop in hand. "Aria," he said, his voice laced with excitement. "There's a weird anomaly picking up on my device. You remember that scramble wave we used?" He beckoned her to join him at the kitchen table. She leaned in, squinting at a readout of frequencies. "Yeah, the scramble wave that disoriented the pixies. Are you saying it's still out there?" "Something is, yeah. Look." He pointed to a bright fluctuation on the screen. "It's as if the wave is bouncing around. The signal is extremely faint, hardly noticeable, but it's definitely there." "So maybe they're not gone," Aria murmured, a mix of hesitation and hope blossoming in her tone. Sam opened his mouth to respond, but paused. His gaze shifted to the nearest window, beyond which a hazy sunlight illuminated the city's sprawling rooftops. Outside, the world looked ordinary. A delivery truck rumbled by. A couple of pigeons bobbed along the ledge. But it all felt pregnant with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the pixies, or something much like them, remained at the edges. She felt a pang of anticipation. Weeks ago, she would have scoffed at the idea that magic existed, that it could swirl overhead and tinker with the city's networks. Now that experience had changed her. "If they come back," she said quietly, looking at Sam, "we'll be ready to meet them, maybe on better terms. We can learn without everything falling into chaos." Sam offered a smile. "Agreed. We'll find a way. Next time, instead of chasing them off, maybe we can communicate, or at least figure out how to coexist." Her heart gave a firm beat of excitement at the notion. In that moment, she remembered the swirl of illusions, the pixies chuckling as they soared between satellite dishes, orchestrating a fleeting and surreal show of color and light. Perhaps next time, the city itself would be prepared to witness them without fear. Outside, a sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, causing Arya and Sam to jump slightly. They grinned at each other. For a split second, both had the same thought, that it might be the pixies returning. The breeze died down, replaced by the ordinary hush of Monday traffic. Yet a shared sense of anticipation lingered between them, as did the faint glow of possibility. Arya took a moment to stare at the horizon through the glass, the rooftops layered in checkered patterns across the distance. In her mind's eye, she pictured the swirl of luminous wings dancing above those rooftops, weaving illusions into satellite signals and delighting in the wonder of it all. She took solace in the idea that maybe in some hidden corner of the sky, they still soared together, waiting for the right moment to return. And when that moment arrived, she and Sam wouldn't run or hide. This time, they might just greet their magic with open arms.